alone can't have happened, and we fight. We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. We have come to demand that Congress do the right thing and only count the electors who have been lawfully slated. Lawfully slated. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Since we had that, Jonathan, I wanted to put that in there in context for that day.
Right, and I think that it's a mistake to omit material like that. But the most jarring thing about this indictment is that it basically just accuses him of disinformation. This is a disinformation indictment. It says that you were spreading falsehoods, that you were undermining the integrity of the election. That's all part of the First Amendment, and I think the courts will look skeptically. He might have a fair shot with a D.C. jury and maybe a D.C. judge. He's going to have a harder time with the courts. And this reminds me of sort of the McDowell complaint, where he took the Virginia governor, got a conviction, and then it was unanimously overturned by the Supreme Court. It is a bridge too far. And one of the things I was looking for is I assumed that Smith had this type of aha moment, that there's something in there that the January 6th committee didn't find, that supported. We heard about witness tampering. It's not in there. I mean, everything in this indictment is basically what has been discussed in the news. Now, by the way, the other thing that is not in here is conspiracy for incitement. Not in here is a seditious conspiracy. Those were the claims that Democrats used in the impeachment and said that the evidence was absolutely clear. People like Schiff and others said that he's clearly guilty of those crimes. Well, they're not in here. Instead, he's using the favorite of prosecutors, these type of conspiracy and obstruction claims. But I think there are some serious legal problems with this indictment.
What is in here, Andy, at one point are descriptions of several private phone calls between the vice president at the time, Mike Pence, and President Trump. As we know, former Vice President Pence testified to the special counsel and to this effort for the grand jury here, and it talks about efforts to essentially get him to try to overturn the election. But you're saying, both of you, that this is protected speech and that it's going to be hard to get to conspiracy?
I think it's even beyond that, Brett. I think there you get into this whole idea of criminalizing a frivolous legal theory. Now, look, Eastman's theory may have been a bad one. I think it was a bad one, but it was something that he was allowed to rely on. And generally speaking, in this country, what we do with frivolous legal theories is we figure that the jury system will take care of it, or the political system will. We don't criminalize them, and that's what this indictment attempts to do. I think in connection with the incitement stuff, I mean, this is some of the low-rent stuff that prosecutors are not supposed to do. If you've got evidence that Trump committed incitement, then charge him with incitement. But of course, I can say, as somebody who actually successfully prosecuted a seditious conspiracy case, they don't have a prayer of a case like that, for precisely the reasons that Jonathan was laying out. So what do? What you're supposed to do in that situation is put it aside and plead what you can actually prove. And what Smith does here is kind of nod and a wink. There's a section that's called exploiting the violence of January 6th. I forget exactly how it's articulated, but he talks about exploiting it because he can't accuse him of actually aiding and abetting it or committing it in any actionable way.
All right, we're looking live at this is downtown D.C. at the special counsel's office. We're now under 2 minutes for Jack Smith, the special counsel. I want to bring in, we just mentioned the Vice President Pence. Joining us now, Mark Short, former Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Mark, I don't know if you've read through any of this or you're just hearing Jonathan and Andy talk about it, but your thoughts on this moment and what it means.
Well, Brett, I think it's a pretty tragic moment for our country that the former president's been indicted 3 times. I'm not a lawyer and can't comment about the criminality, but I do think you've quickly seen kind of the former president's defense shift to now saying, well, look, lying and defrauding the public isn't necessarily a crime. And I do think that has been a dramatic shift of where we've been in this debate over the last couple of years, because I think there has now been testimony from people inside the campaign who testified that they told the president that there was not sufficient election fraud that would have changed any results. I think there's probably been testimony from people like Mark Meadows and others that have said that lawyers told the president, the vice president never had such an authority, and that never in our history in 250 years has a vice president been able to overturn election results. Nor would we as Republicans want Kamala Harris to have that authority in 2024. And so I do think that you've seen a shift in what the coverage is. Whether or not it's criminality, I think that is a different standard. And I do think that there's concern among many Republicans that there has been a two-tiered system of justice, and they see that Hillary Clinton getting off, they see Hunter Biden felt trapped differently. But I do think there's a difference in the way this has been covered.
Mark, I appreciate it. Stand by if you would. We're going to go live now. Special Counsel Jack Smith speaking to reporters about this indictment.
Good evening.
This guy, in my opinion, is
The
shameful.
indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots, and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues.
What about Nancy Pelosi and not calling the troops in? Trump had the troops ready.
So that our evidence
My
can be
friend,
tested in court
shame
and
on you.
judged by a jury of citizens.
You're a Trump
In the
hater.
meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation, and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty
He is innocent,
beyond a reasonable doubt.
and these charges
in
are
a
all
court of
political.
law. I
Shamefully.
would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order.
Nonsense. A lot of them are part of the swamp.
Thank you.
Why didn't you charge any of the other co-conspirators, Mrs. Bennett?
You already discussed that the election.
Are you planning to bring any other charges with any more individuals?
Not going to answer any questions.
Special Counsel
He's made
Jack
his
Smith,
political
short
speech,
statement
and that's
there
it.
On the 4 counts. Again, the 45th President of the United States indicted for a 3rd time on 4 counts: conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy
Shamefully.
to obstruct official proceeding, obstruction of official proceeding, conspiracy against rights.
Americans need
back
to
with
stand up
Andy
and
Jonathan.
vote for Donald
Jonathan,
Trump.
there was not a lot of substance there as far as anything else. We do know there are 6 co-conspirators listed in this indictment. Your thoughts on what he said and how he said it?
I think he established that this is the criminalization of disinformation. That's what he was referring to. I think he's going to have a hard time with that. I mean, this looks like basically a complaint that follows Oscar Wilde's rule that the best way to be rid of temptation is to yield to it. I mean, it does not appear that this was motivated by new evidence. And in order to get a conviction, he will have to use material that, in my view, is clearly protected by the First Amendment. He's allowed to follow bad advice. I was doing part of the coverage on that day. I criticized the speech when Trump was giving it. I disagreed with what he said about Pence. That doesn't mean that he's a criminal for following that advice or taking that view. And more importantly, you have Democrats that challenge the certification of Republican presidents. Were they also engaged in a criminal conduct when they did that? I think this is going to face very severe scrutiny. The question is whether the Trump campaign can get this into the appellate courts quickly, where I think Smith's going to have a hard time.
Andy, about timelines, we don't know this timeline specifically. We know the judge has been appointed, but you guys both say that the other documents case seems more troublesome for the Trump campaign, the Trump team, and the former president. And yet we have other legal hurdles to go in Georgia and in New
all
York.
a
Your
conspiracy
thoughts on the timeline
to
and what
stop
you heard
the
from
Republicans
special
from
counsel?
taking over the
Well,
presidency.
just to start with what I heard, Brett,
Particularly
that was
with
one of the most
Donald Trump.
demagogic presentations I've ever seen in a high-profile criminal case. Anyone who listened to that, any normal person reacting to that, would assume that Trump was alleged to have carried out the Capitol riot. The entire presentation that he made was not about what the core charges in his case are. It was about the Capitol riot and the security personnel who were injured in the Capitol riot and who had to fight to defend the Capitol riot. And then you turn to his indictment, he's not charged with the Capitol riot. So if that is what he has to resort to in order to sell his case to the public, I think that's very telling in terms of how compelling his case is. As far as the timeline is concerned, I think he's going to have, if it's a good judge, we'll have to see, he'll have a very hard time getting this case to trial, because having decided to already indict him on the Mar-a-Lago case, he's not in a good position to go to court and say, as he said in his remarks, that he wants a speedy trial and he wants to get this case to trial. Now, I know for political reasons they'd love to have the Capitol riot, which he's underscoring, in front of the voters in the run-up to the election. But as a legal matter, by bringing the first case first, he's now crimped the amount of time that Trump has to prepare for what looks like it's going to be a legally complex trial. So I think he has a very hard time, if you get a good judge, getting this case to trial.
Gentlemen, thank you. Stand by if you would. We need a whiteboard for all of this. It is like planes going into LaGuardia with this legal situation. But the person who's dealing with this case joins us now. John Lauro is former President Trump's lead attorney on this specific case. He joins us with his first public reaction. John, thanks for being here. You heard what the special counsel said. You've read the indictment. Your client's been talking about it quite a bit today on Truth Social. Your thoughts on this?
It's a terribly tragic day that we find ourselves in, where political speech now has been criminalized, where an existing Justice Department, Merrick Garland, has a boss. His name is Joe Biden, and Joe Biden's running against Donald Trump and losing currently. And now we have that Justice Department indicting President Trump for actions that he took as the chief executive of the United States with respect to public policy matters. So now we have the criminalization and the weaponization of public policy and political speech by one political party over another. And it's not surprising when it comes. It comes on the heels of unbelievable allegations against Mr. Biden and his son, as well as the fact that Donald Trump is leading in the polls right now. And now we have what essentially is a regurgitation of the allegations in the January 6th report, which was highly political. It really reads no differently. So it's really an astounding document, because for the first time in American history, a former president is being prosecuted by a political opponent who wields the power of the criminal justice system for what he believed in and the policies and the political speech that he carried out as president. This is unprecedented. It affects not just Donald Trump, it affects every American who now realizes that the First Amendment is under assault. It's under attack by the Biden administration. We now have a political incumbent who is attacking Americans for their beliefs, attacking Americans for their speech, and attacking Americans for their politics. This has never happened in the history of our country, and it's playing out right now.
Yeah, John, let me read from the indictment.
And we need to vote
specifically
for Donald Trump and for the Republicans.
Presidential election. Despite having lost, the defendant was
As
determined to remain in
Americans,
power.
patriots.
So for more than 2 months following
Whether
the
you're
election,
Democrat,
January 3rd,
Independent, or
2020, the defendant
Republican,
spread lies
you need this
that there had
election,
been an outcome determining
2024,
fraud
to
in the
vote
election and that he'd
Republican.
actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. Created an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and eroded public faith in the administration of the election.
I would like them to try to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump believed that these allegations were false. What did he see in real time? He saw changes in election procedure in the middle of the game being carried out by executive level people at the state level, election officials, but not the state legislatures. He had an advice of counsel, a very detailed memorandum from a constitutional expert who said, Mr. President, these states are complaining about what happened. You, as the executive, have the ability to ask Vice President Pence to pause the vote on January 6th, have these states audit and recertify, and that way we know ultimately who won the election. And that's the only thing that President Trump suggested. There's nothing unlawful about that. He was entitled to do that as the chief executive officer carrying out the laws, and nothing about that was obstructive. It was quite interesting that Mr. Smith talked about the violence on Capitol Hill. He's not being charged with that. There's no allegation that President Trump incited any violence or did anything to cause any violence. Just the opposite. He's being indicted for free speech. He's being indicted for objecting to the way that the 2020 election was carried out.
Absolutely, and he should have objected.
That view
I objected myself.
Are they next? Because
Still
the
do.
reality is that if a president can be indicted for free speech, then anybody can be indicted. So when this case goes to trial, we're going to be representing not just President Trump, but every single American that believes in the First Amendment.
Amen.
And believes in your ability to redress and bring grievances to Congress. And that's exactly what people were doing. You had these alternate electors that said to the Congress, we have serious doubts about what happened in the 2020 election. We're bringing these grievances to you. Listen to us. That's being criminalized now. Don't forget, we had an extraordinary set of circumstances in 2020. We had the COVID virus. We had laws being changed in the middle of the game, and Donald Trump had every responsibility and every right to raise these issues.
To your point, you lost the 2020 election.
Brett, you take a look at all of the stuffed ballots, you take a look at all of the things, including things like the 51 intelligence agents.
There were recounts in all of the swing states. There was not significant widespread
We're trying to get recounts, real recounts, not just numbers of
investigations,
votes.
widespread corruption. There was not a sense of that. There were lawsuits, more than 50 of them by your lawyers, some in front of judges that you appointed.
Look at Wisconsin.
That came out with no evidence.
Wisconsin has practically admitted it was rigged. Other states are doing the same right now, and it's continuing.
Reviews
It was a
of
rigged
every
election.
potential case of voter fraud in 6 battleground states, and they found fewer than 475 cases.
You know why? Because they didn't look at the right things.
Okay.
Brett.
My point in showing that is that he is pushing back on June 20th on that front. John, when it says that he knew that the election was lost, and it quotes people that they've interviewed, what's the pushback to that?
Very easy and very simple. It's not just issues of fraud, it's also the fact that procedures were changed. Undeniably so, that procedures at the state level were changed without the ability of the legislature to weigh in. And what President Trump was raising when he asked Vice President Pence to send it back to the state legislatures was to give the legislature in each state of those contested states one last chance to make a determination. Because the reality is that the state legislatures in every state has the ultimate responsibility for qualifying electors. So what Mr. Trump did was exactly constitutionally precise and in order. There was nothing illegal about that, and he was required to take steps as President of the United States to ensure that that election was held in a valid way.
Absolutely.
All of that now is being criminalized. The one thing I will say, though, in 2020, Mr. Trump's campaign had a few weeks to gear up and present evidence, and it was very difficult. We now have the ability in this case to issue our own subpoenas, and we will relitigate every single issue in the 2020 election in the context of this litigation. It gives President Trump an opportunity that he has never had before, which is to have subpoena power since January 6th in a way that can be exercised in federal court.
But what you're talking about, the states did that. Each individual state certified the elections. They were signed by the governors, many of them Republican governors, and many of them Republican secretaries of state, that signed off and certified those election results before they came to Washington, D.C., and we had what was January 6th. So what you're talking about was done. It was certified.
No, I'm sorry, but you're missing what Professor Eastman's advice was. Professor Eastman said that the state legislatures had not opined and weighed in on the changes that had been done in those various states.
But each one of those states since that time, now we're talking about 2 years later, has not reopened those cases. They have not, some of them have had audits, but they have not reopened the 2020 election from that point of view, and some of them are Republican legislatures.
And it's never been presented to the states. Now what we're going to have is not just a civil trial, but a criminal trial for Mr. Trump exercising his right to speech. So there may be disagreement about what happened, but the bottom line is we're now treating this as a criminal case rather than, as we're doing, Brent, talking about this in the context of politics and free speech.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about legal for just a second, John.
Yeah.
And you are specifically running point on this case. And according to our legal analysts, is that true?
Along with Todd Blanche. Yeah, we're co-counsel on it, definitely.
On the other cases, is it legally somebody else? Like for the documents case, are you also on that?
I'm not on that team. I'm concentrating on the First Amendment issues. I'm concentrating on this case, which is a direct attack on our constitutional
Will you
principles.
run point in Georgia if an indictment comes out in Georgia?
No,
Somebody
absolutely.
else.
There are other groups working on that. Obviously, there's coordination around the country. And all of this is being done in the middle of an election season where Donald Trump is winning. So you have a series of criminal cases that are being brought and serially brought out on a regular basis now with only one objective in mind, and that's to interfere in this election cycle, which is now underway.
Absolutely.
What about the stories that these campaign funds are now paying for legal fees and you're running out of cash in that front?
Well, I'm not involved in that, but the bottom line is the way that they're trying to take out Donald Trump is through the legal process. So he's being forced to spend money on legal defense, which should be spent on the discussion of critical ideas and critical issues. People want to hear the issues. They don't want to relitigate 2020. And that's exactly what the special counsel, I should say Merrick Garland and the Biden administration had to sign off on this indictment. And what they've really done is invited now a relitigation of 2020, but this time in a criminal court, which is unprecedented. No sitting president has ever been criminally charged for his views, for taking a position. And by the way, is there any doubt there's two systems of justice in the United States?
Right.
Was Hillary Clinton prosecuted for the Russian hoax?
Right.
Were those individuals who said, don't worry about the Biden the Biden laptop because it's just Russian disinformation, are they being prosecuted?
Right.
No. Only one person in America is being prosecuted for his political beliefs.
Donald Trump.
And that should send a chill, a warning
Every
to
citizen.
single American who one
Absolutely.
day wants to get up and say, this is what I believe in. I disagree with
Absolutely.
the Biden administration, but these are the beliefs I have. Because every person who does that now is subject to a potential criminal case.
Last thing, according to this indictment, they believe that argument would empower every losing politician to do what former President Trump did. And by using what they call in this indictment false information to stir up people, that the system then breaks down. I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's what it says in this indictment.
So what they're saying is politicians may use hyperbolic speech or excessive speech in some way and stir up people, and we're going to criminalize that. Good luck in the United States if that's where we're heading. Good luck, because the reality is that everything that Mr. Trump requested to be done was done with the advice of counsel, was done with lawyers giving him advice. Those lawyers are going to come in and testify. Nothing was done in a way that wasn't constitutionally permissible. It's
Right.
all politics.
All
It's
politics.
all politics. And if we're criminalizing politics, what's going to happen when the Republicans are next in office? Think about the pressure that's going to be put on a Republican president to go after and indict sitting Democrats now in Congress or in state houses for their political views. And then we have this vicious circle once the criminal justice system has been politicized.
John, we appreciate your time, especially with this breaking and digesting all of this. We'd love to have you back as this goes forward. We know you're going to be busy.
You did an excellent
but
job.
Thanks for coming on Special Report.
Thank you.
And he's exactly
Joining us
right.
now again, Mark Short, former Chief
Thank
of
you,
Staff to
folks.
Vice President Mike Pence. Mark, you just heard John.
Thank you, Brett.
There. What are your
And
thoughts?
thank you, Fox News, for at least allowing
I think
the
there's
truth.
several fair points. I think that Donald